This is Kim Meyer, host of Choose to Rise. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hi, everybody. This is Baxter Colburn from Public House Media. From all of us here at PHM, we'd like to thank you for your support and wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
This is Annie Scogan, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Head Over Heels Pageant Talk here on Public House Media. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come out and check my show, Head Over Heels Pageant Talk, where we talk about all things involved with the Miss America organization and both myself and my other co-host, Jordan Butler's experiences within it. A new show comes out bi-monthly, so don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so that you never miss an episode of Head Over Heels Pageant Talk. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome to a Tuesday edition of Fantasy Wizards here on Public House Media. I am the congested Scott Wisniewski. I'm joined by Robert Gardner, trying to recover from my trip to Cleveland on a fun-filled weekend. How was your weekend, Robert?
You know, my weekend, there were some ups and some downs. Obviously, an up. I won this weekend, so that's fantastic. Big down, I lost my quarterback, Carson Wentz.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I am sitting in a situation where I have 6 semifinal games coming up next week. And I should be happy, right? You know, I had 4 byes and I had 2 games I won this week. However, in all 6 of my leagues, one of them my quarterback, Drew Brees. So far, he's healthy. The other one, my quarterback is Russell Wilson. And then in 2 leagues, I have Carson Wentz. And the other 2, I have Josh McCown.
Ooh.
So here I am, thought I was sitting in the catbird seat, and now I'm scouring the waiver wire to try to find an adequate replacement for those 2 names we just mentioned.
No, absolutely. I feel you. The second I saw Wentz go down, I started looking who's available in my league, who's out there. Dropped one, put a waiver claim in for Foles. Got another one in for Jameis Winston. Just trying to hedge my bets.
Wow, you have Winston available. That's pretty well. That's certainly a good replacement. It's obviously nobody's going to be Carson Wentz, but I think that's a pretty fair replacement. Let me tell you what the general consensus was in my leagues where I'm trying to replace Wentz and McCown. Bortles be available everywhere. Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Foles, and Jay Cutler. And there was one league where Aaron Rodgers was still available, but otherwise he was pretty much sitting on someone's IR.
Yeah.
So those are the names that are out there. Now, I looked at some of the matchups coming up. So Blake Bortles in consecutive weeks plays the number 31 and number 32 pass defense. So if you're looking for a matchup play, even though I'm swallowing really hard as I say, you might want to look to pick up Blake Bortles because, trust me, he's kind of been right up there with Joe Flacco on my guys that I love to hate list. But he might be the best option out there. Jimmy Garoppolo would be a good play this week, but maybe not next week as he faces that Jacksonville secondary. Nick Foles, you know, if you believe in the system that's there in Philly and you believe in the ability for them to keep him upright and not under pressure, he's also a good pickup. And boy, Jay Cutler looked kind of interesting yesterday.
Interesting is how I describe Jay Cutler a lot.
Sure. So out of those names, I mean, obviously Foles is the guy you went out and got, and you were lucky enough to get Winston or put a claim in for Winston another. But do you like any of the other guy out there is Yates, and we'll talk more about the Savage injury in a minute. But are there any names out there out of those guys that kind of stand out for you?
You know, I think matchup-wise, you have to at least consider Bortles, as bad as that sounds. But really, the player out there that's intriguing to me based on his last 2 weeks' performance is Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah. I think there's a lot of upside and a lot of boom potential with him in the game.
Well, and you and I talked about it, I recall, a couple weeks when he was named the starter, that if you have a roster spot, stash him. And if you have a keeper league, you should be grabbing him to stash him.
Absolutely.
And apparently, by looking through my waiver wire, a lot of people took that advice because he's on rosters and stashed right now. So, but I like Garoppolo as well. So that's what you're dealing with. And, what a weird, it seems to happen every year, but I don't think it's happened to a high-profile quarterback. Carson Wentz was arguably the fantasy MVP.
Absolutely.
And to lose him right here in the essentially the semifinals of your fantasy playoffs is tough. But he's not the only one who had some injuries. Savage, what a terrible injury for the Houston quarterback. I don't know if you saw the footage of this, essentially the seizure he had on the field. And then the fact that he went back was put back in the game on the next drive.
Just really scary and I mean really disappointing on the medical staff's part. I mean, you gotta do better.
Absolutely. I mean, we want to talk about safety and taking care of players, but then we can't even get that right. And by the way, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, and it was based on something I saw in Cleveland because one of the stops we made was at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. And, I listen to guys like Mitchell from the Steelers talk about how this game has gotten soft and, all this other garbage. And then I watched a 4-minute video of Ronnie Lott tackling people, right, and knocking them senseless. And never once did he lead with his helmet. Ironic, right?
No, absolutely.
So when I hear players now, and listen, I only played high school football. I don't pretend to be an expert. But when I listen to football players say, well, that's the way I was taught to play the game. Well, you were taught wrong.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's, that's alive in the world out there. And, I played football in high school and in college. And, I played as man's man game as you're going to play. But when I look back, who was there to protect me from myself? I mean, that's what the league has to do. I mean, ultimately, as the player, you're not going to make that right decision all the time because you want to compete. You're caught up in the moment. You got to be there to protect those guys. Absolutely.
So the NFL and the Houston Texans and the officials dropped the ball on that. But I laugh at we're trying to make the game safer because we know what we know now about head injuries. And we know that it's not a good thing. And I think that the league is doing mostly a good job except for on Sunday. But some other injuries, Amari Cooper re-injures himself.
Yeah.
Kelvin Benjamin in that. So here's my question about Benjamin. Okay, you played him. The Bills played him. He did score a touchdown. But he had leg injuries on a slick, icy, snowy field. Why in the hell do you play him?
That's a great question. I mean, you're just asking for trouble. I mean, he's a big guy. He's got a history of being injury prone. He's already dinged up. I mean, you're just asking for trouble.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And you're asking for trouble because of the way that feels. And then Alvin Kamara left the game last Thursday with a concussion. No word yet on whether or not he's cleared for this week, but something to keep an eye on. So those are some other notable injuries. Now, there are some other injuries of note to be aware of that you may not think affect your fantasy team, but the Los Angeles Rams lost both of their tackles. Now, you're going to want to see if they're going to play because if they're not playing, that really impacts the value that Jared Goff is going to have.
No, absolutely. I mean, quarterback's the most important position, and if you can't protect quarterback on the outside, that's not good.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, we had a couple of people reach out to me Monday or a little bit this morning about some lineup quandaries they have. Ironically, one of them could be near and dear to my heart. So Joey needs a quarterback, and his choices are Marcus Mariota and Blake Bortles. Now, again, I mentioned that because I put in a claim for Blake Bortles. Mariota faces one of the worst pass defenses in the game in San Francisco. Bortles, they face Houston, and Houston's not much better at number 31. Mariota's been terrible. against marginal teams. I don't know that even though the matchup says Mariota's got a good draw, I don't know that I could feel comfortable starting Mariota against anybody.
I mean, I don't see how you can. The last 3 games, he hasn't even eclipsed 200 yards passing.
Right. And he's certainly not getting it done on the ground like he used to,
Yeah.
I just think, you have to go, again, I can't believe I'm saying it, but to go with Bortles, right?
I think in this situation, absolutely.
So I think that helps. Hopefully that helps Joey. Pam has a question as well. Pam needs a running back, Carlos Hyde or Kareem Hunt. Now, Kareem Hunt finally got back in the end zone. He's facing a Chargers team, though, that's been surprisingly good. Carlos Hyde. So the thing about Carlos Hyde is he's been sharing carries with Matt Breida. However, in the last 2 games, Carlos Hyde has 34 touches for 144 yards. Breida has 25 touches for only 67 yards. So there's no doubt in my mind that Carlos Hyde is still the lead dog in San Francisco, but the Tennessee run defense ranks 6th in the NFL.
Yeah, I think, a couple of things. There's some reasons to like Hyde, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo as quarterback, because he's going to take that extra man out of the box because he can actually throw the football, something that San Francisco didn't have before. But at the end of the day, I think Kareem Hunt has to be your play. He's a featured piece of that Kansas City offense, and we really saw Kansas City this past weekend reinsert Hunt into the game plan more prominently, and how much better the team played overall as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. They dismantled the Oakland Raiders. Kenny had a question. He's looking for 2 wide receivers out of a group of 3. I was looking at Kareem Hunt. So you have Michael Thomas versus the Jets. You have Devin Funchess against a really bad Green Bay secondary who will be without House. Yeah. And Allen from San Diego. So that's 3 really good matches, but he can only pick 2. I think you have to go Allen. Kansas City's secondary, despite what Oakland wasn't able to do, Kansas City still has a terrible secondary. I think Keenan Allen's your first choice there.
Absolutely.
And I feel like you have to go with Funchess because even though Cam Newton hasn't had a great year throwing the ball, with Benjamin being traded, with Olsen slow on his comeback, Funchess, just on sheer volume and sheer touches alone, probably a slight edge over Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I definitely would lean towards Funchess here because I think the past couple of weeks we've seen that rapport with Cam Newton really start to develop and kind of turn a corner. It seems like they're more in sync now. They're more on the same page, and I think ultimately that's going to lead to more production for Funchess.
All right, so hopefully that helps. If you have any more, you could certainly send them live as we do the show or send them for the Thursday show, and we'll talk about your lineup issues as you try to win yourself a fantasy football championship. Speaking of trying to find the right fits, it's time for Miracle or Mirage, and we'll start it out. We talked about him a minute ago, Jay Cutler. Is he a guy you're going to add to your roster or start if you have some injuries at quarterback, or was last week a fluke?
If you're looking to start Jay Cutler in the semifinals of your fantasy football playoffs,
yeah,
I don't even know what to say to you.
Yeah, I agree. I just feel like some people, because of the lateness of this injury, have, these 2 quarterback injuries have maybe backed themselves into a corner. Another guy who had a really big game last week, and I think might be able to duplicate that at least in some fashion this week against the Packers, James Stewart had a huge game. He seemed to get more of the looks than McCaffrey and had a couple of big runs, which of course inflated the stats a little bit. But if you have James Stewart, are you looking at him as an RB2 or maybe a flex?
I definitely think so, and I think the key stat that really jumped off the page for me when I was kind of taking a look this week was 5 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks.
Sure. It seems like they're leaning on the veteran a little bit, as this is a time of the year, no matter how good a rookie is, they're getting to a part of the season they've never seen before. Most college players don't play 14 games in a season, 15 games in a season. They start hitting that wall, and that's where veterans like James Stewart can maybe rise up and shoulder a little bit more of that load.
Absolutely.
Hey, Rod Smith had a pretty good game for Dallas. Now, next week, Ezekiel Elliott comes back. This week, it's still the Alfred Morris, Rod Smith show. I liked what Smith did. I think I'd take a flyer on him and maybe look to flex him somewhere. What do you think?
I really liked what I saw from him, but I'm not sure he's going to get enough touches to be valuable in your lineup.
Sure. I think, and you never know, because obviously they're both just kind of seat warmers for Ezekiel Elliott.
Absolutely.
Jamal Williams had a big game in Cleveland and looks to be now the lead dog, as Aaron Jones only had 4 carries. Jamal Williams had a receiving and a rushing touchdown. I like Williams. I think he's a guy you should be adding to your roster if he's out there.
Absolutely. I really like Williams. At least 15 carries the last 5 weeks. And with Brett Hundley playing better, I mean, that whole Green Bay offense looks a lot better, and there's a lot more to like than there was 4 weeks ago.
And even if Aaron Rodgers is cleared to play this week, which we're still at this 7:15 on Tuesday, still unsure, they're not going to want Aaron Rodgers to drop back and throw the ball 40 times, which means no matter who the quarterback is, I think Williams is a good play.
Absolutely.
Hey, Kenyon Drake had a good game against the Patriots. Again, Damian Williams has been banged up, so Drake's been getting the bulk of the carries, but he looked good, and he maybe putting some distance, much like early last year when Coleman, the first 2 games of the year, Coleman and Freeman were neck and neck, and then Coleman got hurt and Freeman broke out. He owned that spot for the rest of 2016. Do we think this is now Drake's spot for the remainder of the season?
I think so, because if you look at the Patriots game, that was just confirmation from the prior week when we also rushed for 100 yards. So I think we're seeing more consistency from him as he's getting more touches, and I think that bodes well for him long term.
I completely agree. Another guy who had a little bit of a bounce back, and I'm not sure that I think it's a little bit of a mirage, but we talk about veterans, right? Here's a veteran. Frank Gore had a really good game in the snow against Buffalo.
I mean, Frank Gore just apparently doesn't age. Sure, it's his first 100-yard game of the season, but man, lean on the veteran in the horrible conditions, and he comes through.
Yep, 100%, and a guy who has certainly been there before. Next on the list is Willie Gallman. Now, the coaching change in New York. You see different pieces of the puzzle. Still no real healthy receivers. Sterling Shepard played but was ineffective. Gallman seemed to pass Darkwa on the depth chart, at least for this week. And again, you see that sometimes when you have a new regime, a new coaching regime. Is this something you're buying, or are you just not sure yet?
I mean, at this point in the season, the only giant I'm going to trust is Evan Ingram.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. I'm not buying anything else, including Eli Manning right now, just because it's just one of those. It's just one of those things. They burnt us all year, right?
No. I mean, if Eli Manning was going to have a breakout game, it would have been last week against the Cowboys after the whole benching the prior week.
Right.
I mean, that was his game to come out and just light it up, and that was I kind of halfway expected that, and I was giving my Cowboy fan friends some needling about it.
Absolutely. Here's another one. We put him on our dump him list or keep him or kick him list last week, but Javorius Allen had a big game against Pittsburgh, and now he's trying to reinsert himself to be a relevant option in the Baltimore backfield.
Yeah, he's making plays here and there, but he's still not getting the consistent carries for me to put any trust in what Buck Allen is doing.
Yeah, and there's just a lot going on there. I mean, you still have Collins doing a great job, and you're starting to see more touches now from Danny Woodhead too. So that really just makes it a little bit tough to call. By the way, it's Public House Media's Fantasy Wizards. Robert Gardner, Scott Wisniewski, as we're taking you through some tips for your playoffs, Miracle or Mirage. Couple more left. Tommy Lee Lewis. And no, I'm not talking about the guy from Men in Black or the guy who played the Fugitive or the guy chasing Harrison Ford in the Fugitive. Tommy Lee Lewis had a big game for New Orleans. I don't know that that's sustainable.
No, not at all. And when I was kind of looking at him and checking the stats and the history, he hasn't even had more than 3 targets all season. And I don't see that changing at this point.
Yeah, I would agree 100% on that one as well. 2 more. D.D. Westbrook had a decent game. Are you looking to add him to your team?
I think at this point, D.D. Westbrook, especially in deeper leagues, it could be a valuable player for you in that flex position sometimes, especially in a PPR league, because he's going to get a lot of targets in that offense.
I like Westbrook as well. I actually picked him up last week somewhere. And the last one on the Miracle Mirage list, Jared Cook was probably the only thing going in Kansas City this week.
Yeah.
This week in Kansas.
Yeah. And honestly, I think he's a mirage because I like Jared Cook a lot, but when I dig deeper into his numbers, his catch rate is atrocious. He gets a good amount of targets, but he doesn't transition those into production.
Yeah, well, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone in Green Bay who believes that. They let him go, and I thought they made the right financial choice. But because of the way the Marty Bennett thing worked up here in Green Bay, now everybody thinks Jared Cook is Keith Jackson all over again. But I definitely agree. By the way, David Bobke wanted to let us know that he's looking forward to using Westbrook this week. It's a good matchup. It really is a good matchup this week. All right, so keep them or kick them to the curb. I know it was snowy in Buffalo, but not a whole lot out of Jacoby Brissett. To be quite honest, not a lot out of the last 3 or 4 weeks. Is it time to give him the kick?
Yeah, I think at this point in the season, especially deep in the playoffs, he's an expendable piece of your roster.
Yeah, I agree as well. Brissett, if you're stuck with starting him and you're not looking on the waiver wire, you're probably in trouble. Andy Dalton, boy, who saw that Bears win coming?
I mean, wow. That just spoke volumes about where the Bengals are right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest with you. And listen, I really want to let you know that I don't think Marvin Lewis is a bad coach. I think he's a bad head coach. His team, he hasn't won a playoff game, even though they've gotten to the playoffs quite a bit in Cincinnati. But the fact that his team completely loses control of themselves is kind of an indictment. It's like a thing that somebody once said to me, it might not be your fault, but it's your problem. He's got a problem with that team year in and year out, and it might be time for him to look somewhere else for a job. But in this case, we're talking about Andy Dalton, and I think you kick him as well. Jay Ajayi, couple of questions. Here's where this one gets interesting, and I put him on here for a reason. He hasn't done a lot in the last couple of weeks, but might they lean on him more now that they've got Foles at quarterback?
I think absolutely Ajayi is a player you have to keep, especially in this situation with your number one quarterback going down. I mean, they're going to lean on the run more to protect Foles and take pressure off of him. I think everybody knows that. So ultimately, Ajayi is going to get more opportunities.
Yeah, I think you hold on to him for a little bit. Now, on the flip side of that, McKinnon in Minnesota, in the last 5 games, his total rushing yards have been 32, 48, 22, 46. Hopefully you're not starting McKinnon.
Yeah, I think he brings value in PPR leagues because he catches the ball pretty well out of the backfield. So, there's some potential for some more scoring there depending on your format. But in a traditional format, I don't think you can have him in your lineup at this point.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Lamar Miller is a surprise. And I looked at some stats before the show, and I found it's hard to believe. So his best rushing totals of the year came back-to-back 75-yard games in Week 4 and Week 5. He's only had one game, and I believe it was the Week 4 game, where he totaled 100 total scrimmage yards. I didn't realize he was that average. Again, I'm not saying you would cut him per se, but maybe there's better starting options out there.
No, I think there are definitely better starting options out here, out on the waiver wires. I look back at his stats too, and what was really surprising to me was no touchdowns since Week 8.
Right. So, it's funny because he's one of those guys that in some people, like a casual observer, for example, basically they just, put it on autopilot. Oh, yeah, you got to start Lamar Miller. No,
Yeah.
not really true at all. Another guy, now we go back to the Eagles, but as much as I said to keep Ajayi, it might be time to cut LeGarrette Blount. Last 2 games, 15 carries, 38 yards. I think if they're going to lean on the running game, they're going to lean on Ajayi a little bit. I don't think LeGarrette Blount should be anywhere near your starting lineup.
I don't think so at this point either. I mean, he's not going to get the touches. I think everyone knows they're going to lean on Ajayi.
Marcus Mariota, a guy that I drafted ahead of Carson Wentz in one of my leagues, and obviously by week 3, Carson Wentz was my starter. You may be forced to keep him if you had some injuries to quarterback this week, but man, we talked about it at the beginning of the show. You're better off with a guy like Garoppolo or a guy like Bortles than you are with Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point in the season, I'm going to look to start Bortles over Mariota. And if you said that at the beginning of the season, they would have called you crazy.
Yeah, right. Because Mariota was kind of the, the darling, the guy who was going to, take
expecting
it to the next
a big
level.
breakout season, expecting to see him really turn the corner as a quarterback.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so along those same lines, let's switch over to some receivers real quick. The next receiver here is Tyreek Hill. Again, I'm not a if he's not catching the long, let's be honest, if he's not catching the long bomb, he's not really doing much for you.
That's very true. I mean, he's very boomer bust. I mean, he's developed more as a receiver this year, but he still has a limited route tree. Kansas City does use him in creative ways. He brings value on special teams. So obviously in deeper leagues, with some custom scoring formats, or you're going to have some potential with him. But I think in a traditional format, it's hard to trust him.
Yeah, I think that is 100% true. Here's another one. Emmanuel Sanders in the last 4 games. He's played in the last 4 games. 8 catches for 54 yards in the last 4 games.
Yeah, I think that speaks volumes about Denver's quarterback situation, too. It's just not – this is not what I expect from John Elway.
Yeah, absolutely. A guy who should know a little bit about quarterbacking. And then, of course, a perennial on our list. 7 games without Aaron Rodgers. 22 catches, 43 yards for Jordy Nelson. You can make a really good case that Devontae Adams is a wide receiver too and should be starting every week. You can't make any case for Jordy Nelson being anywhere near your starting lineup unless you feel comfortable that Aaron Rodgers is going to play. And if Aaron Rodgers plays, does that then reignite that chemistry and now make Nelson valuable again?
The fan in me wants to say, man, Aaron Rodgers and him will just get back on the same page immediately if Aaron Rodgers is healthy and Jordy Nelson's got to stay on your roster. But, I mean, the fantasy player in me, I can't even really have him in my lineup for sure, and I might not even have it on my roster from his production.
I agree 100%. So, lo and behold, we've made it through another edition, our semifinal edition. Next week, we're going to hopefully get people ready for a championship, and hopefully my quarterback woes won't prevent me from at least playing in a couple championship games next week.
Hey, I'm right there with you. I'm hoping at least one of my waiver claims goes through so I can put this Wentz situation behind me.
Absolutely. Robert Gardner, it's been a pleasure again as usual. I thank you for making this season as enjoyable as it's been. Of course, we thank everybody who watches our show, Fantasy Wizards, who's part of Public House Media, who connects with us on Facebook, on Twitter, through the Public House Media site. What an amazing vehicle that Public House Media is, and I am truly honored to be part of it, Robert.
No, absolutely. The programming's amazing. The hosts are amazing. The interaction, the engagement, fantastic. Couldn't be happier to be a part of Public House Media.
So hopefully next week, join us. I wish everybody out there luck, and hopefully you'll be playing for championships next week. Good night, everybody.